Between worlds, Osiris speaks on life's transitions. I am Osiris, sovereign of the duat, witness to the last breath, guardian of the great crossing. I who have died and returned, who have passed through the veil and emerged transformed, who have witnessed countless souls in their transition from form to formlessness and back again. From the sacred space between worlds, I speak now to you, traveler on the path of awakening. For while you perceive yourself as living, you stand always at the threshold of death. And while you perceive yourself as one who will one day die, you are perpetually engaged in the process of rebirth. The illusion of solid ground. You believe yourself to be standing on solid ground in a body that seems permanent, in a life that seems stable, in a reality that seems fixed. But I, who observe from beyond the veil, see the truth. You exist always at the threshold, at the liminal space where what appears solid is dissolving, and what appears empty is taking form. The Egyptians understood this when they built their civilization along the banks of the Nile. Each year, the river would overflow its boundaries, dissolving the markers between land and water, washing away structures, drowning the familiar landscape. When the waters receded, fertile silt remained, black, rich soil from which new life would emerge. This cycle was not seen as disaster but as sacred necessity, the dying of one form allowing the birth of another. The dissolving of boundaries revealing the fertile void from which creation springs eternal. Your life follows this same pattern. What you call myself is not a fixed entity but a process of continuous dissolution and renewal. The body you inhabit today is not the body you inhabited 7 years ago, every cell replaced, every molecule exchanged. The mind you identify with shifts from moment to moment, thoughts arising and passing, beliefs forming and dissolving, perspectives constantly evolving. Even in a single day, you cross the threshold numerous times, from waking consciousness to dream state, from focused attention to open awareness, from individual identity to relational merging, from mental activity to embodied presence. You are not a being who occasionally transforms. You are transformation itself taking temporary form. The great threshold. Death is merely the most dramatic threshold, the most profound liminality, the most complete dissolution of familiar boundaries. It is not an ending but a transition, not a conclusion but a crossing, not a termination but a transformation. I, Osiris, who was murdered by my brother Set, who was dismembered and scattered across the land, who was gathered and reassembled by the divine magic of Isis, know intimately the nature of this crossing. What appears as absolute ending reveals itself as radical beginning. The Egyptians recognized this truth, enshrining it in their most sacred texts and elaborate rituals. The Book of Coming Forth by Day, which your scholars mistakenly call the Book of the Dead, was not focused on death but on successful transition and continued existence. The mummification practices were not denial of death but technologies for transformation. The tomb decorations were not desperate grasping at past life but maps for the soul's continued journey. All these practices recognized that the great threshold of death was not to be feared but prepared for, not avoided but embraced, not denied but consciously engaged as the ultimate initiation. Yet you need not wait for physical death to understand the wisdom of the threshold. Every significant transformation in your life bears the same pattern, the dissolution of what has been, the uncertainty of the in-between, the emergence of what shall be. The small deaths. Throughout your existence, you experience countless small deaths, thresholds of transformation that prepare you for the great crossing. When a relationship ends, a form of death occurs. The self that existed in relationship to another dissolves, leaving an empty space from which a new identity must emerge. When a career concludes, a form of death occurs. The role, routines, and relationships that structured your existence fall away, revealing the unformed potential from which new purpose will arise. When a belief system shatters, a form of death occurs. The assumptions and meanings that ordered your understanding dissolve, opening you to more expansive truth. When illness transforms your body, a form of death occurs. The physical abilities and sensations you identified with change, inviting a deeper recognition of what remains unchanged. Even moments of profound joy or ecstasy involve a kind of death, the dissolution of separate self into unitive experience, the transcendence of ordinary boundaries into expanded awareness. Each of these thresholds offers a rehearsal for the great crossing, an opportunity to develop the wisdom that will serve you in the ultimate transition. The wisdom of surrender. What is the wisdom of the threshold? First and foremost, it is the wisdom of surrender. Not passive resignation, but active yielding to what is. Not defeated acceptance, but aligned participation in the larger movement of life. Not giving up, but giving over to the intelligence that orchestrates all transformation. In Egyptian iconography, I am often depicted with arms crossed over my chest, holding the crook and flail, symbols of divine authority. This posture represents the paradox of power through surrender. The crossed arms signify containment of personal will, while the royal implements symbolize alignment with cosmic order. At the threshold, all illusions of control dissolve. The separate self that believes it directs its own destiny faces its ultimate limitation. Yet in this very surrender, a greater power emerges, not the power to resist transformation but the power to flow with it. Not the power to maintain fixed form but the power to adapt and evolve. Not the power over life and death but the power expressed through life and death. This surrender is not something you do once in the final moments of physical existence. It is a capacity you develop through daily practice, through momentary recognitions, through repeated encounters with your own limitations. Each time you release attachment to how things should be, you practice the wisdom of the threshold. Each time you allow emotions to arise and pass without resistance, you practice the wisdom of the threshold. Each time you let go of an outworn identity to embrace a new becoming, you practice the wisdom of the threshold. The gift of uncertainty. The threshold is characterized by uncertainty, the dissolution of the known without immediate replacement by new certainty. The space between an exhale and an inhale. The moment between stepping off one stone and landing on the next. The pause between asking a profound question and receiving its answer. These liminal spaces can trigger panic in the ego, which equates certainty with safety. But I, Osiris, who has traveled through the deepest uncertainty of death into the mystery of rebirth, tell you this: uncertainty is not your enemy but your ally. For it is only in the space of not knowing that genuine wisdom can emerge. It is only in the admission of uncertainty that true discovery becomes possible. It is only in the release of fixed knowledge that higher understanding can dawn. The ancient initiates understood this principle well. In the mystery schools of Egypt, aspirants were brought to the edge of their understanding, to the limits of their certainty, to the threshold of their courage, and then invited to step beyond. The initiatory chambers were intentionally disorienting, designed to dissolve ordinary perception and open initiates to extraordinary revelation. You need not enter a temple to receive this initiation. Life itself brings you repeatedly to this threshold, confronting you with questions your existing framework cannot answer, challenges your current capacity cannot meet, mysteries your rational mind cannot solve. When you stand at such thresholds, resist the temptation to rush toward premature certainty. Do not grasp at familiar answers when new questions are being born. Do not seek solid ground when the dissolution is not yet complete. Do not demand clarity when the mystery is still unfolding. Instead, develop what the Egyptians called a stillness of heart, the capacity to remain present and open in the face of profound uncertainty. Not demanding resolution but allowing revelation. Not seeking escape but embracing emergence. The paradox of identity. At the threshold, all fixed identities dissolve. The question, who am I, can no longer be answered with roles, accomplishments, relationships, or personal history. In the Egyptian understanding, the soul was not a single entity but a multiplicity of aspects: the Ka, vital force; the Ba, personality; the Ak, transformed spirit; the Ib, heart; the Ren, name; the Shut, shadow; and the Sekhem, power. At death, these elements separated and transformed, each following its own journey while maintaining mysterious connection. This sophisticated understanding recognized that what you call a self is not a fixed, singular entity but a dynamic, composite process. The coherent identity you perceive is a temporary arrangement, a pattern rather than a substance, a verb rather than a noun. At the threshold, this complex arrangement dissolves into its constituent parts before reassembling in new configuration. The I that emerges on the other side of transformation is both continuous with and distinct from the I that entered the threshold. I, Osiris, embody this paradox. The deity who emerged from death was not identical to the king who was murdered, yet carried forward the essential qualities through transformation. I did not merely return to previous form but emerged as something more, sovereign of the underworld, judge of souls, lord of resurrection. So too in your journey, each threshold cross doesn't merely restore you to prior identity but evolves you into expanded being. You maintain continuity of awareness while experiencing discontinuity of form. You remain yourself while becoming more than you have been. This is the great paradox of transformation. Only by allowing the dissolution of who you have been can you discover who you are becoming. Only by releasing fixed identity can you embody your larger essence. The companionship of guides. No one crosses the threshold alone. In the Egyptian tradition, elaborate texts and rituals ensured the soul would be accompanied through the stages of transformation. Divine beings served as guides, protectors, and witnesses for the one undergoing transition. Anubis prepared the body and led the soul to judgment. Thoth recorded the weighing of the heart. The 42 assessors witnessed the soul's declaration. Isis and Nephthys provided protection and compassion. And I, Osiris, presided over the transformation, embodying its fulfilled potential. So too in your journey you are never alone at the threshold, though it may sometimes feel so. Visible and invisible guides accompany your transformation. Some take human form as teachers, mentors, therapists, friends, or family. Others appear in dreams, visions, synchronicities, or intuitive knowing. Still others operate beyond ordinary perception, serving as what different traditions might call guardian angels, spirit guides, ascended masters, or aspects of the divine self. The threshold may appear as a solitary crossing, but it is in fact a profoundly relational experience, an opportunity to discover the interconnection that remains when individual identity dissolves. To recognize the companionship that sustains when familiar relationships transform. To experience the guidance that emerges when certainty dissolves. This awareness counters the greatest fear most humans bring to the threshold, the fear of absolute aloneness. I, who has witnessed countless souls in transition, assure you, you are held in a field of consciousness that will never abandon you, guided by intelligence that will never mislead you, embraced by love that will never reject you. The integration of opposites. At the threshold, apparent opposites reveal their unity. Life and death, beginning and ending, form and emptiness, known and unknown, these seeming dualities dissolve into paradoxical wholeness. The Egyptian understanding recognized this interpenetration of opposites. The West, where the sun died each night, was seen not just as the direction of death but as the gateway to the Duat, the other world where transformation occurred. The black soil left by the Nile's inundation, symbolically associated with death, was called Kemet, the Black Land, and recognized as the source of abundant life. I myself embody this integration of opposites. As Lord of Death, I became the guarantor of eternal life. As one who was dismembered, I became the symbol of wholeness. As a deity who suffered profoundly, I became the compassionate judge of souls. This is the profound wisdom of the threshold. What appears as a reconcilable opposition from ordinary perspective reveals itself as complementary aspect of unified reality from threshold consciousness. You need not wait for physical death to realize this truth. When you stand at any threshold of transformation, personal crisis, spiritual awakening, creative breakthrough, relational transition, you are invited to perceive beyond dualistic understanding. To recognize that what appears as ending contains beginning. What seems like darkness harbors light. What feels like loss reveals gain. This perception is not spiritual bypass or toxic positivity. It does not deny the reality of suffering or the legitimacy of grief. Rather, it expands awareness to hold these experiences within a larger context of ongoing transformation. The cyclical nature of existence. The threshold wisdom reveals that existence is not linear but cyclical. Not a straight line from birth to death but a spiral of continuous renewal. Not a single journey with definitive beginning and end but countless journeys within journeys, cycles within cycles, transformations within transformations. In Egyptian cosmology, each day enacted the cycle of creation, dissolution, and renewal. Ra, the sun deity, was born each morning, traveled across the sky, died at sunset, journeyed through the underworld during the night hours, and was reborn at dawn. This was not seen as repetition but as eternal renewal, each cycle both echoing and advancing the great pattern of existence. So too with human experience. What appears as ending cycles back to new beginning. What seems like loss circles around to different form of gain. What feels like death spirals into unexpected rebirth. This understanding transforms your relationship with endings. Rather than fighting against the completion of a cycle, a relationship, a career, a phase of life, a belief system, you can recognize it as natural and necessary turning in the spiral of existence. You can honor what is completing while remaining open to what is emerging. You can grieve what is being lost while welcoming what is being found. The threshold is not a cliff edge but a turning point, not a terminal station but a transformative passage, not the end of the journey but its continuation in new form. The eternal present. At the threshold, time itself transforms. The linear progression from past to future dissolves into the eternal now, the only moment that ever truly exists, the point where all transformation occurs. The ancient Egyptians encoded this understanding in the hieroglyphic language itself. Many verbs could be read as past, present, or future depending on context. Actions were more often portrayed as ongoing processes rather than completed events. The distinction between has happened, is happening, and will happen was fluid, recognizing the ultimate unity of temporal experience. When you stand at the threshold, whether the small thresholds of daily transformation or the great threshold of death itself, you step out of chronological time into what might be called sacred time or eternal time. The dimensionless point where all possibilities exist simultaneously. This eternal present is not a theoretical concept but a direct experience available in moments of threshold consciousness. In profound meditation, when the narrative of past and future dissolves into pure awareness. In creative flow, when time expands and contracts beyond ordinary measurement. In deep love, when moments acquire infinite depth beyond their chronological duration. In intense crisis, when normal time perception alters to accommodate expanded awareness. These experiences offer glimpses of the consciousness that awaits at the great threshold, not bounded by linear time but embracing all temporal dimensions simultaneously. Living from threshold wisdom. How then do you live from this threshold wisdom? How do you embody this understanding not just at moments of dramatic transformation but in ordinary existence? First, through recognition. Begin to notice the thresholds present in daily life. The transitions between activities, the shifts between emotional states, the passages between relational dynamics. Recognize each day as a miniature of the great pattern, the dawn as birth, the noon as full expression, the dusk as completion, the night as gestation for new beginning. Second, through practice. Develop rituals that acknowledge and honor transitions. Create conscious gateways between different aspects of life rather than blurring boundaries. Practice ceremonial recognition of significant crossings, not just the culturally acknowledged ones like graduation or marriage, but the personally meaningful transformations in your unique journey. Third, through surrender. When you find yourself at a threshold, whether chosen or unexpected, practice conscious yielding to the process. Not passive resignation but active alignment with the transformative current. Not denial of difficulty but willing engagement with necessary dissolution. Not pretense of certainty but honest acknowledgement of not knowing. Fourth, through presence. At each threshold, practice fully arriving rather than rushing toward the next phase. Not clinging to what is completing, not grasping toward what is emerging, but dwelling completely in the liminal space itself, the fertile void where ending and beginning interpenetrate. Fifth, through integration. After crossing any significant threshold, take time to integrate the transformation. Not immediately filling the space with new activity, not rushing to solidify new identity, but allowing the wisdom gained through transition to be fully absorbed into your being. The ultimate invitation. I, Osiris, who embodies the completed cycle of death and resurrection, leave you with this ultimate invitation: do not wait for death to understand the wisdom of the threshold. Let every threshold in your life become conscious initiation, every transition a sacred passage, every ending a gateway to new beginning. For the greatest secret of existence is this: the awareness with which you meet the small thresholds prepares you for the great threshold. The consciousness you bring to daily transitions shapes the consciousness that will carry you through death itself. The capacity for surrender you develop through life's challenges determines your ability to surrender fully to the ultimate transformation. This is not morbid fixation on mortality but its opposite, full engagement with the transformative nature of existence. Not denial of death but recognition of the continuous cycle of dying and becoming that constitutes life itself. Not fear of ending but trust in the renewal that follows all completion. When you live from threshold consciousness, you need not fear death, for you have died and be.